I'd like to show you why knowing your why is the start of your journey. Without a strong why, it can be so difficult to reach your maximum potential. My name is Dr. Jason Ballara, and every week I meet with real estate investors and mindset specialists that are taking action in order to build a life according to their own terms. We will break down what drives successful people and allows them to achieve at such a high level. If you are a professional wanting to break through, or simply someone that wants to hear an inspiring story, the Know Your Why podcast is made for you.
Hi everyone, I'm Jason Ballara. This is the Know Your Why podcast, and today I'm here with Micheal Porche. I'm very excited to speak with Micheal today. He's a short-term rental owner and investor and founder of STR Legacies. Looks like you also started out as a firefighter. So I really want to hear your story from your words, Micheal. So first of all, thank you for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be able to share my why, share my story, and what drives me.
Awesome. Well, why don't we start with your story, and we'll definitely work our way to your why, but I want to hear all about what you're doing.
Yeah, so in short, I entered into the short-term rental space, but what brought me there was quite a few things. And I guess growing up in California, that was more my space. I never thought I'd leave, actually, so I no longer live in California. However, that's the space I always thought I would be. I grew up in a single parent home, so family time was limited at times just because my mother was always working. I had quite a few siblings, so things were busy there, and I'd say a lot of fun there. But I grew up in Simi Valley, and around that area, you'd see a lot of wildfires. So that was like the most common thing. Like it would just happen, like verbatim every other season. So people would always ask, "Oh, what do you want to do when you grow up?" I'm like, well, I want to be a hero. I want to be a fireman. Like that was always kind of my intuition of always what I wanted to do as a kid. And I think as I just grew up, different things came to mind. I love being creative. I love figuring out new things, but ultimately I still love the idea of being able to serve people in some kind of way. Serve people in different, I'd say, magnitudes, from running an anti-human trafficking not-for-profit. I had the ability of taking that prior to me getting hired with fire service to bringing that into the fire service and teaching all the first responders on how to recognize it within our city, which was pretty cool. And then, but ultimately when I was 25 is when I got hired with the fire department. And through that, my thought process, where I thought it was a pretty cool job for a place where I could really invest my time, have a job that takes care of me, but also allows me time to do ministry, to go on mission, to serve in the Human Trafficking Advisory Council, to be able to work and have a family life. But it came down to it when I did met my wife actually the same year I became a fireman, but didn't actually have the opportunity to date her until a couple years later.
Sometimes we have to convince them. It's okay.
Oh yeah, it was a lot of convincing. It was more of like me chasing after her with a club. But and I got to an opportunity where I've been on for a few years at that point. I was with the city of San Diego, and but living in San Diego, I just had no time. If I was going to allow my wife the opportunity, I wanted her to have the choice to be able to work, because me growing up in a single parent home, man, I really acknowledged one, the aspect of my father being not around, not present, and then seeing the confidence that left to my sisters and myself. I made a decision that I wanted to be very present with my family, my wife, and my kids. And I thought that firefighting would allow me to do that. But then it came to a position where it wasn't allowing me to do that. The normal firefighter schedule is, working 10 days out of 30 days, which is amazing. But those are 10 days that you're gone 24/7. But typically it's not that bad if you're working that schedule. Where I was living in San Diego, it's a little price kind of high and being able to afford. And especially if you're on a single income, I ended up working not only because I had to, but because of being short staffed, ended up working around 20 days out of the month. And so in some of those days, me coming home, because we ran all night, going calls, doing this and that, it would be in a position of me sleeping half the day and not being able to, engage with my family or take time for ministry. So all the things I really loved doing and wanted extra time for, I didn't have any time for, and that was including my family. And so it got to a point where I was like, well, I need to do something else. And an engineer, one of my colleagues, he gave me that purple book, the good old Rich Dad Poor Dad. And that really opened the eyes of the possibilities. And like many people know, it doesn't really tell you how to do things, but it tells you what you can do and gives you a vision. And that really started the picture of my real estate investing journey, where I made tons of mistakes and jumped in wholesaling, flipping, a little bit of small, or mostly wholesaling, small multifamily actually. And then it landed me in buying 2 assisted living facilities, which was pretty interesting. I did that for a little over a year. And then shortly, follow more, it put me into a place where now I'm doing short-term rentals. And that's where I've been the last year and a half. And it's been a good time.
Awesome. There's some, real estate aside, some very interesting things in there that I think we'll definitely need to talk about. We don't have to go straight there, but the human trafficking interest that you had at such a young age is kind of something that you certainly don't hear that a lot. And then I think it's funny, I've had at least one other guest that is a fireman in New York City and had that similar experience. He was a child when 9/11 happened. And so seeing that, sort of firefighters, I mean, heroes all the time for sure, but in those large scale crisis events, you really think about what that profession means to the safety of many, many, many people. And I now live in California, and we've been lucky enough to not have any wildfires like affect our house directly, but certainly they're everywhere. It's just a part of life there, and it's kind of interesting how much a part of life it is, and how people are like, yeah, look over the hill, like there's smoke billowing up, but everybody's just sort of, if you're not directly in the line of it, sort of like just going about with their normal day. So I can see how, being in CME, how that would impact you that way, seeing that kind of frequently. So
Yeah.
interesting background. And I don't know, I don't know if any of it had to do with your move into real estate, but I understand that, when you get caught up in that sort of work for someone else, make a wage, and you're like, well, we need to afford these things. If I work more, we can afford these things and have a little, and it's just, you get in that cycle, right? That kind of thing that everybody talks about. So I totally get, sort of looking for that other thing. And so you did, sounds like you sort of touched on a few different areas of real estate, but what brought you to short-term rentals and kind of, and allowed that to stick? Why is that your focus?
Yeah, so that's a great question. When my wife and I had the opportunity to buy our first house, and we moved to Idaho to buy those assisted living facilities, but we knew that we wanted to buy a house here as well. And so when we did, I was very bent on being able to house hack. And so for those of you who don't know what house hacking is, when you're able to live in one area of your house and you rent out a room or another side or another unit. And so the question was, should we put this up as a long-term rent? And like, yeah, that's traditional the way to do it. And it was a great idea. We were able, our mortgage at the time was $1,800, and we could save about $800 on our rent for the long-term tenant in there. And then people were talking about Airbnb and vacation rentals and all this stuff. I was like, well, that's pretty interesting. Maybe we could try that out and see what it takes. So we ended up like separating a little bonus room that we had and putting a wall that separated our house to that house with a little, double locked door. And we had its own separate entrance. We put some more furniture up there, a little mini sink, like a bar sink with a little refrigerator and things. And we started renting it out. And our first month that we rented it out, we made about $3,000. And we're like, whoa, this is a lot different than long-term rent. So we went from, making or saving money on our mortgage to being paid to live where we do. So that's what got us started.
Makes total sense. I mean, right? Once you realize that the power of that, it's like, okay, this seems to work well. And it's not that it's, well, we'll actually maybe we'll get into how much work it is, but I was going to say it's not as much work as some of the other things you were trying, but maybe it is just as much work, but it's a different type, I think, maybe. So you had that one. How did that progress?
Yeah, so I mean, it kept going, and then we went on a little vacation because we did have some success from some of our other real estate ventures, and we were in Florida, and then we asked ourselves the question, man, wouldn't it be really cool if we could just invest in areas where we want to go on vacation, and so that led to another answer of, well, we found out not every place we go to makes sense for us to invest, for example. But it started that journey of us trying to find locations that, one, we might want to visit, but two, like, would give us amazing returns. And went down this rabbit hole of really just digging deep, buying data, really getting nerdy about it. I'd make graphs of all these different cities and what kind of returns, what the Zillow Home Index would be. I would make graphs of like 3 measurements that I really focused on were rental demand, because demand outperforms the brand of anything. So if there's a demand for it, there's always going to be some sort of returns, even if you have a lame product. So the demand was the number one thing I was looking for. And then it was, after that, I wanted to see some kind of revenue growth. So I wanted to make sure that there was growth for the long term in that market, and there's reasons for people to continue to go there. The next thing I looked at was our cash on cash return. So that was more of, am I able to, buy a house for $1 million to make 50,000, or am I able to buy a house for $100,000 to make 50,000? So with those 3 metrics, I made like a sheet of like 50 different cities when I first got started, and I'd have to constantly update them. But that kind of helped me find markets and trends to be able to know where to invest in the short-term rental space that would give me certain dividends that I was looking for. And it's been quite outrageous to see some of the numbers, but it's been pretty cool.
So where did you go to source that data?
So there's 3 different data that I use to source it. One is more commonly known. It's called AirDNA. They source their data from Zillow, from Airbnb, and Vrbo. So they take the numbers of what it was listed at in terms of how many units are available from those sources, and then they will go and clock the price point at which someone would book it, if you will. So that was one. Another source I use was Mashvisor. They commonly do the same thing, but through only Airbnb. And there's also another source called Key Data. They're a little more expensive, but they are predominantly best used in large markets because they go back end. And so rather than, because there's many platforms that advertise your short-term rentals on, whether it's Airbnb, Vrbo, Booking.com, Expedia, little hotels, some, on the East Coast, there's a lot of European type sites that get utilized to find different sites or bookings as well. But there's Key Data works with the local property managers in that area, and they give them a deal so they can able to capture the actual units through their property management software, and they record the actual payments that people are getting. So it's more than just the Airbnb or Vrbo, but it's the direct bookings on their own websites. It's the property management platforms. It's Booking.com. So they get everything. which is pretty cool. So that's probably the most accurate data that I've seen around, but that's where I'd source it.
Interesting. I've heard of Airbnb, but I hadn't heard of the other two. So that's really helpful. I think that'll provide people who are interested in getting in this space, another place to look. So you made your list of 50 markets. What did you start? Where did you start? Where did you start? And then why? Why did you decide those, to start there?
Yeah, I started actually in a couple places. So one was Pensacola area, Florida, which wasn't really Pensacola, it was more closer to Gulf Breeze, which is where I really looked at because the price points were pretty low. There's some good, excuse me, industries involved in that area. So, one of the things I look for the stability of market is how many industries are involved. So there's military, big healthcare out there. There was a couple tech items things that were out there. So there's more different types of industries that were involved in order to supply, good job growth. But and there was a huge, and of course, travel. I always like to have travel as my main kind of thing because I'm in the short-term rental space. But that kind of met all those expectations and the cash on cash return. So for example, I just closed on a house about a month ago. I bought it for about $160,000 in Gulf Breeze. Did a little more of a rehab work on it. And on that property, I was able to, projections are around 53,000. So that's in Gulf Breeze. So that was one of the areas that we chose to dive in. And we also chose another area in Shenandoah, Virginia. We liked that national park in that area. And the reason being is because there was multiple little markets all right next to Shenandoah. So it was Luray, Shenandoah, Rileyville. All these markets were performing very similarly, and they were all different cities, all different towns, pretty small markets, maybe less than altogether 200 active rentals. So it's supposed to be like kept secret, but
it's out now. Yeah.
I know. But I feel like I can say it because I just recently heard someone who I follow named Rob Bilt. He's the new co-host of Bigger Pockets, and he mentioned it in his podcast about building a tiny home village there. And I was like, oh, you let it out. So I'm like, but it happens to be the demand is outrageous. Home values just started to rise over there, but they've been steady for a very long time. But overall, you're like one of my first students, she bought a property for around 300,000 or so, and she's looking to generate this year. The projections showed around 80,000, but she's on track to make 90,000 this year or a little over from that one property. So it's pretty cool to see the type of income and just that you can generate from these smaller properties, especially if you can work it out well.
And those numbers you're saying are profit, right? That's after expenses and everything.
So no, those are all revenue. Typically the profit's going to be around, what I shoot for is from like anything more than 40% is what I shoot for in terms of profit. So that one would probably be around like, maybe 45,000 or so, give or take.
Yeah. Okay. And when you're purchasing these, how are you sourcing and finding financing? Like, what kind of loans are you using for them? Are you getting investors? Like, what's your process?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I have made a lot of relationships with different debt service coverage ratio type loans. So that's DSCR. So those are loans that really give you a loan based off of the asset you're buying versus based off you. That's primarily what I use. There's still other different types of loans I use, but we typically like to do a little bit of rehab with our projects, just because there's a lot of value add that we can find in certain areas that end up being really good buys. But so we'll go in with like 10% down loans. We'll buy in with that, the debt service coverage ratio, and then a lot of times we have different partners because you can run out of your own cash very quickly. But we'll have private investors and who we might utilize for part of the down payment or part of the rehab. So there's shorter loans. We just form it in a promissory note. Because we're rehabbing it, we have the ability to, help pay it back through a refinance. Usually it's less than 1 year, or just from the rehab loan that we get as well. So it's kind of backed from that security as well.
And when you're refinancing them, you're still refinancing them as a DSCR loan.
Yes, typically, give or take, depending on the deal situation, but typically yes, and that's usually more common ones we've been seeing is the interest only, refinance into an interest only loan for maybe about like 5 or so years or something like that.
I'm always fascinated by what you can get for debt at this point. I mean, it's just remarkable how I think people that aren't in the space don't realize what you can do with these loan products and really just, if you're paying interest only and you only had to put 10% down, and I mean, it's just like you're really able to increase your cash on cash quite a bit that way. So it's pretty incredible. If I learned sort of very quickly that's maybe the most important piece to real estate is whatever your debt product is, that it can make a huge difference. So that's cool that you have things available. And my understanding is that these types of loans maybe weren't so common even a few years ago, but now that short-term rentals are I think becoming a bigger and probably considered safer market, do you find that it's easier to obtain the loans now?
I think so. I mean, I wasn't as invested I am into real estate a few years back as I am now, but I will say, like, it's most of the lenders who I talk to, with the exception of one, or maybe even him too. Actually, all of them are been coming up with these new products. So these aren't products that they've had for years. These are products that they had last year, just started. So it's really interesting. So and I've seen a lot of this. Well, they all have, and I think it's because short-term rentals are so new that they all have different metrics and things that they're utilizing as standards. So some will be basing it off of population in the area. Some will be, basing it off of the distance to a larger city. Some will base it off of just the long-term rents because they don't feel comfortable basing off of the short-term rentals, but with that, they don't care where you find it. But so yeah, they all have different metrics that they use for the short-term rental ones.
How are you managing them?
So that's another great question. So we went into thinking, well, if I probably left the fire service about almost a year and a half ago now, and I was like, well, I could spend more of my time just doing management and doing something else to make money. And so we started utilizing just recently, last year, making our own management company that can help service all of our properties that we worked on. So we created our own short-term rental management company that we manage our own properties, and we just started also going out to other people and started managing other people. So we're kind of in the works of all of that, but we're kind of getting all the kinks out. But we've been slowly but surely, like, maybe getting one new client every couple weeks. So it's been kind of a new venture as well.
Good. I mean, it's starting that out. I think a new client every couple of weeks is great. Are you using like the Airbnb sites, VRBO? I know people, I'm not familiar, so I'm sort of just things I've heard, but people talk about like almost hosting it themselves rather than putting it on an Airbnb and sort of like really self-managing. What are your thoughts on
that? As far as hosting on Airbnb, or
well, and again, maybe I'm not even asking the question right, but I feel like I've heard of people that are sort of trying to go around using Airbnb maybe to avoid some of the fees or something like that. I don't really know, and maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm just misunderstanding what people are talking about when they're saying they're self-managing and they're kind of doing that themselves. But so that may be a misinformed question. But you're you're using like Airbnb pretty standardly as your platform.
Yeah, yeah. So I use a couple different platforms, but I will say, in terms of the self management side, I think Airbnb has made it very easy for people to self manage. And they definitely structure it that way. But they also, man, you have these companies like Airbnb and Verbo and Booking.com who spend so much money on advertising. It's hard not to utilize them to get attention, just because they have so much traffic going their way in order for you to get bookings. But I will say, most people will try and self-manage, and I think that's smart if you have maybe one property. As soon as you start to like get into two or three, even, like, it gets very difficult to manage, the more properties you have, and it becomes just like more of a full-time job. Especially with the short-term rental, because there's a lot of guest exchanges and things like that. I will tell you what we do. We like to book or manage on 3 different platforms: Airbnb, Verbo, and Booking.com. And through those platforms, what we tend to do is we try to capture every guest that stays with us, all of their information, and at least the ones that we liked. And then we will remarket to them at the beginning of the year, and through special discounts, or for them to leave us reviews. Well, hey, 15% off if you leave a review, or 15% off for the new summer if you book before this date. And that kind of helps and direct them back to our booking site, so we're able to capture. Essentially, it costs a little more, but or the same. It just depends on what the growth has been like, but they still see the coupon for 15% off, or booking directly through us, and it usually helps out. But it's been pretty
Cool.
good.
So what's your portfolio look like now?
So we're pretty small. We got 6 as of right now, and we're looking to.
Seems like plenty of them. Yeah.
Yeah, we have 1, 2, 3 units in Florida that are, one unit is under construction right now. It should be done end of April. We actually have another new build going on, so 4 in Florida, but the new build should be completed and also in April. That's in Perdido Key. And then we have 1 here in Idaho, is where I live. That was my first, so that's why I call it. I always count it as part of my unit, because whenever we travel, we end up renting out both spaces here, which is pretty nice. Ends up paying for all of our travel. And then we have the 1 new build, as well as a couple that we manage in Virginia.
Very nice, very nice. And you're coaching as well, coaching people on this?
Yeah. So funny story. When I was getting really deep into the data, I was thinking to myself, some of these are really big investments, but and then somebody reached out and wanted me to speak at their real estate meetup group about how to invest out of state with short-term rentals. I was like, great. And he's like, well, we're in Coeur d'Alene. I'm like, well, that's far. So if not familiar, I'm on the bottom part of Idaho, and they're on the top, and that's about like a 7-hour drive. Oh, wow. So I was like, all right, well, I guess I'm gonna fly in. But I said to myself, I'm not going to go up there without trying to see if I can sell something. So, or at least give an offer of some sort where I can utilize this data, not just for myself, but for other people. And so I just did a little presentation in regards to the 3 things I look for, which is the rental demand, revenue growth, and cash on cash return. And I talked about, where to find that data and what's important about it, and how to do it with little or no money down, and so you can scale that way. And I opened up a coaching program under those key factors. And was able to maybe, I think about 10% of the room took my offer, and I was like, all right, I can run with this for a little bit. And so I started diving a little deeper into that. And now we're just getting out of the beta version actually this month. And so we've been in the beta version trying to like work out all the kinks, see the best ways of coaching, seeing what's really going to be like helping out the students to get their first properties. And so it's really just been more of a recent venture that's grown, and more people have been buying kind of out of like just randomly seeing some of my posts and like, hey, I'm really interested. And so they'll watch a quick webinar and like, oh, wow, that's really cool. I want to do that.
Yeah, that's cool. That's great. Might as well, spread the knowledge to other people, and it helps you as well. I mean, it's a win-win. I love it. Well, let's switch gears, Michael. Let's go to the part where I get to ask you a few questions that I ask every guest. And the first one is based on the name of the podcast being Know Your Why. So yeah, so what's your why? Let's talk about that.
Oh man. I can show you right here. I'm not, is this a video podcast?
Video. It goes on YouTube as well.
All right. So this is, let's see if I can point this out. It's kind of my why right there. And I loved just seeing your podcast. And I'm not sure if you can even read that, but
to pursue freedom for my tribe, spiritually, relationally, physically, financially.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So I'm really big about being able to really those items. I mean, there's a lot of why behind what I do. And first and foremost, man, I really, really do believe in a creator, and just, we're not here by accident, and that there's purpose behind that. And so a lot of my why comes from that. And then moving into, secondary and everything that I do. But my family, freedom to be able to do these things. I mean, most when I grew up, I've been really surviving, a lot of surviving. And so I never, and my mom, if you will, is still in that, like, I would say survival mode. Because that's all she lived, that's all she knows. But because of that, she never got to really experience the world, the cultures, the people, really invest more time in her faith, because she was so worried about just living, if you will, not being able to do things physically. She has a few different ailments that's really followed her because she lived a sedentary lifestyle. And I really do believe in the ability to provide space for me, myself, my family, to pursue the things that we love. And so that being, God, our family, going on mission, being able to help others, looking at these local, I'd say, local things in terms of like fostering, and then far away things in terms of, third world countries where there are just basic needs that aren't given. So I'm a big believer in being able to reach out in those spaces, involve yourself in those kind of spaces in some kind of way, but also in every other facet of life, get to know the world around you, use your body fully, and get after it. I hope that kind of makes sense.
No, yeah, totally. It's great. I love that. But so the second question I typically ask people is, tell us something about yourself that isn't common knowledge, some special skill, a hobby, whatever it is. However, and feel free to put something in there on that regard. But I also want to ask you about how you had, sort of interest in human trafficking at such a young age, where you were like had activism towards that at
yeah,
I don't know, early 20s, maybe before that, I don't know.
Yeah, no, I was probably either 20. I think I was 20 years old when I first started doing stuff towards it. But yeah, it's interesting something about myself real quick. Let's see. I spent 7 years swing dancing, and I taught swing dancing as a kid. That was a lot of fun.
Wow.
That's something.
That's awesome.
The lighter side. But in regards to the human trafficking nature, I was working at a golf club as a busboy, and I think it was like 18, 19 at the time. And this pastor, his name was Francis Chan, spoke at it was like a convention that they're having at this golf club. It was the first dinner of this event called From Forever Found. And they were talking about human trafficking. I don't think I've ever heard of it before. And so that was, man, back in the early 2000s, I guess. But they had mentioned in regards to where it was going happening overseas, and what was happening locally even. And I couldn't imagine I just didn't understand how someone could do that. And I put my little sister at the time, because that was the only thing, like, what if she got caught? And, from a family member or from someone just snatching her, and like, what would I do if my little sister Chloe all of a sudden was missing? Like, I think I would spend the rest of my life looking for her and trying to find information and what to do and how to do it, and just to get her back. And I know even now, as a father, I can even more so say I would do that for my daughter. But that really just, I think that night I couldn't go to sleep. I was really emotionally just wrestling with it, just the very concept of what people do to other people and just the injustice that comes with it. So I was like, well, what can I do? And at the time I was really into fitness. I think I still am, but but I was like, well, maybe if I could, reach the fitness world with this information and raise money for the fitness world and give it to, charities to them, and get plugged in that way. And so I can raise awareness and give funds to these people who are actually doing stuff on the ground. So it'd be a direct correlation. So that's where I started going in that space, and then slowly moved and kind of set a heart for it. And I started a nonprofit called Renew Existence. That's what we focused on. And then I got part of the San Diego Advisory Human Trafficking Council. And that was a part of working with the Human Trafficking Task Force. I ended up educating all EMTs and paramedics within the city of San Diego when I was working for them as a firefighter. And that was really cool, because I got to really get in touch with knowing the workings of where people tend to pimp or take people, or force them or coerce them to do what they want to. And being so close to the border, that was a huge thing. But we found all the hot spots where that happens, and I was able to communicate that to the stations and firefighters who were closest to those areas, which was pretty cool, because it was something that we ran on all the time, but you just never knew. And so I thought that was a pretty cool opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things. It's just, I feel like you would have to have an experience like that with that pastor, because it's unimaginable to me to think that even goes on. And you brought up your sister and your daughter. It's like, yeah, my head just starts like, someone took my kids. Like, what do you?
Yeah.
I wouldn't stop. I'd never stop. It'd just be like, it's so it just to know that that's happening, like actually happening, is just, it's really heartbreaking. And good for you for acting on, in support of that. So I just thought that was pretty incredible, and I wanted to highlight it. So thank you for sharing that. Well, the next question is, when people hear this, I'm sure they're going to want to reach out to you. How would you like them to do that? We'll put whatever you want in the show notes.
Yeah. So a few different ways. If you want to just reach out to me and get to know more my story, or just what we're all about, michealporche.com is a good one. But a lot of people maybe not know how to spell my name right, but michealporche.com is one. And then another avenue is for short-term rental space, if that's something that more interests them. Then it's STR Legacies.com. And that's my website for really all that we do for our coaching and for our data courses. And you can find that at www.strlegacies.com.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, we'll put that stuff in the show notes. Final question for you, Michael. What piece of advice would you give to someone who's getting started in real estate, and whether that's short-term rentals or just sort of in the space? What would you tell them for to encourage them to be able to sort of achieve the level of success that you have?
Yeah, I would. Man, honestly, I think it just comes down to why. What's your why, and then really spend some time and dig into that, because at the end of the day, that's what's going to drive you to take action. And although if you want success in anything that you do, I think the why and the reason why you do it is what's going to be the strongest driving factor, whether it's running away towards something you desire or running away from a fear you want to leave behind or past self. Those are two of the most driving factors that will lead someone to take action. So I think just digging deep and really acknowledging what your why is, whether it's spending time more with your family, having the freedom to travel, being able to be your own boss, or why do you want to be your own boss? I think just really digging deep and counting the cost of what is it going to cost in order for you to do that, if you will.
I obviously agree with you, because that's what the whole podcast is based on. But yeah, 100%. I think that's fantastic, and I think everybody trying to accomplish something great is going to run into roadblocks and hard times, and you need your why to help you push through, so that you don't sort of give up on those dreams. So it's great. It's really important for people to know that. So thank you, Michael. I really enjoyed this. I think it was a lot of great information for people, and I'm sure you'll have a lot more value added through your teaching program as well. So I look forward to seeing your growth and keeping in touch.
Awesome. Yeah, I look forward to connecting very soon.
All right. Well, thank you very much. With that, we will sign out.
I'd like to show you why knowing your why is the start of your journey. Without a strong why, it can be so difficult to reach your maximum potential. My name is Dr. Jason Ballara, and every week I meet with real estate investors and mindset specialists that are taking action in order to build a life according to their own terms. We will break down what drives successful people and allows them to achieve at such a high level. If you are a professional wanting to break through, or simply someone that wants to hear an inspiring story, the Know Your Why podcast is made for you.